I'm Jarrad Brown, Australian expat financial planner based here in Singapore. Welcome to my video series where we tackle the tough personal finance questions asked by Australian expats. Today we're going to cover the key question, should I buy my future primary residence before I go back to Australia? So let's get into some key considerations that you need to ask yourself before you take the plunge. Now, the first key consideration when it comes to considering whether to buy your future residence before you get to Australia is, are you going to be prepared to rent out the property while you're not living in it? Now, for some people, the answer is obviously yes. Who cares if somebody lives in my property before I get there? But for others, they could think of nothing worse than somebody being in their future home. Now, why this is important is because it could mean months or years of lost rental income. It means that capital is tied up in an asset that's not producing an income return, and all you're left with is whatever capital growth it may or may not generate. So this is an important one to consider before making the purchase. The second key consideration is where you consider the property market to go before you actually return to Australia. Now, I'm not referring to the Australian property market, because a lot of people get confused and use the Australian property market figures as a benchmark for every street, suburb and state, when in fact that couldn't be further from the truth. There are very distinct markets within states and certainly within the country. So when I say where do you expect the market to go, I'm referring to your suburb, but not just your suburb, the actual type of dwelling you're looking to buy. Do you think you're going to miss out if you don't get in now? Could that money be generating a higher expected return in other asset classes, whether it's bonds, equities, private equity, or some other form of investment before you get to Australia? There are many things to consider about property forecasts, so make sure you do your homework, consider working with a buyer's agent, and seek professional advice when it comes to working out what these return figures look like. The third key consideration, of course, is tax. Are there any tax implications, positive or negative, for you if you buy your property before you go to Australia? Now, this could be particularly relevant if you're planning to rent out the property, as it could then be treated as an investment, which could have some positive or negative tax implications for you when you return to Australia. Now, are you looking to return to Australia in the short term? Are you going to keep it as an investment for the medium term? It's important to work out what this could or couldn't mean for you in the long run when it comes to your tax position. The fourth key consideration comes down to financing the property. How are you actually going to complete the purchase? Are you going to use a bank loan? Are you going to get a mortgage from an Australian lender? From a lender in Singapore? What are the implications? What are the fees? What are the interest rates? What are the charges? If you're borrowing from a Singapore bank, can you keep that loan when you return to Australia? There are a myriad of considerations and questions when it comes to financing, so make sure that it's structured appropriately for you, and make sure that it's going to continue to work for you once you do eventually return to Australia. Now, number 5, when it comes to considerations for purchasing your primary residence before you return to Australia, is do you actually have a team to help with the purchase? Now, we all know how anxiety producing buying a property can be, particularly for those who've been through it once or twice. And that's when you're living in Australia, when you can pop the kids in the car, drive down the street and actually check it out. Now, how on earth do we do that from Singapore? Particularly with COVID-19 and all of the travel restrictions that we're seeing at the moment. A good idea can be considering working with A, an investment savvy mortgage broker, B, a buyer's agent for your property who has experience in that particular state, C, conveyancers, solicitors. You'll often find that good buyer's agents and good mortgage brokers can recommend teams to assist here. Make sure that you've got people to assist and outline all of the considerations for you. I would also suggest speaking with a financial planner and a tax accountant, or certainly at least one of those, just to make sure that what you're looking to purchase, how much cash you're looking to allocate, does in fact make genuine sense for your financial situation and for your financial goals. The sixth and final consideration when it comes to planning to buy your primary residence before you return to Australia is asking yourself the very important question, are my tastes and preferences going to change before I get back home? Now, if you're planning to return in the next few months, 6 months, 12 months, it probably doesn't matter so much, because what you think you might want now is probably how you're going to feel in the short term. But if you're not planning to be back for a number of years, how on earth do we know exactly what type of property, what area, what suburb, how close to the shops, how close to the beach that we're actually going to want to live in? I, for one, can say that the house I lived in when I lived in Australia a number of years ago is very different to the apartment that I now live in Singapore. We live in the land of convenience, bars, restaurants, shopping centres at our doorstep, but are we going to want that same lifestyle when we return to Australia? Or are we going to want the age-old dream of the big block, fruit and veg growing in the backyard, pets running around, lots of space for future children perhaps? It's very hard to tell and very difficult to predict. So if you're not sure, then make sure that you sit down and plan appropriately. Sit down with a financial planner, work out your options. Maybe you should buy an investment property now and your primary residence in future. Or maybe something else will suit your situation. Whatever it may be, just make sure that you're giving it some thought and seeking appropriate advice. I hope you found those 6 tips and considerations helpful when it comes to the question, should I buy my home before I return to Australia? Now, if you're thinking of buying your own residence, if you're thinking of returning to Australia, please feel free to reach out with any of your questions. If you have some other tips that we've not covered today, fire them through. We'd love to hear from you, and maybe we can even turn them into a future video. Thank you again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time.